All right, and I see we've got attendees starting to join from the waiting room. So we're just going to give everyone a minute or two to get connected, and then we'll get into the bulk of our conversation today about the Mekong-U.S. Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogues. So thank you all for joining. Please hang tight and we'll get started momentarily.
Well, we still have participants joining in, but why don't we get started? My name is Brian Eiler. I'm the director of the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program, and it's a delight and pleasure to be here to launch the fourth report of our Mekong-U.S. Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogues. We've got a great group of panelists here with us tonight, including a keynote speech from Assistant Secretary Dan Crittenbrink, who I will introduce momentarily. But before we hear from Assistant Secretary, I just want to kind of talk about some of the progress that the Mekong-U.S. Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogues is achieving. This last policy dialogue that we held focused on the theme of human capacity and resource building in the themes of education, labor, and health pandemic response. It was a great opportunity to convene government and non-government stakeholders in person for the first time in Phnom Penh back in July, and to have an important discussion, a very inclusive and open discussion about ways that, one, the United States can better engage in human resource capacity building in the Mekong region, and the ways that governments and non-government actors active in the Mekong region can also engage on these issues. And this particular dialogue that we had convened about 50 people from more than 11 countries, and it was just a great opportunity to be together over a few days and to discuss some pressing issues in the region. This is one of 7 policy dialogues that we'll be hosting. We started hosting them a year and a half ago, and this process will wrap up in about a year from now. And we've hosted themes already about connectivity, infrastructure, and energy, as well as now the human resource capacity building. And what's great about this process is that we bring together government and non-government stakeholders from all over the region and actually all over the world, development partners included, to engage in this inclusive kind of bottom-up process about identifying needs, thinking about those needs, thinking about the actors and the organizations and individuals that need to come together to respond to those needs and develop actual policy responses that can address those needs. It's a unique process that I think really exemplifies America's commitment to the Mekong region. And it is one that will continue on through the end of these dialogues to come. And just one final point about the impacts of this policy dialogue process. When the United States and President Biden hosted the U.S.-ASEAN Special Summit back in May, the White House issued a fact sheet about how it will engage with ASEAN, with Southeast Asia. It listed a number of programs and projects that, based on a variety of themes, that address needs in the region. And when I read through that list, I was just delighted because I saw the ideas and the responses that the participants in our policy dialogues developed and put into these reports. The kind of report that we're launching tonight reflected directly in that list of America's programs towards the Mekong. And that just shows, again, that this kind of inclusive bottom-up process can be very impactful. So we're going to talk about those impacts tonight. Again, we've invited a number of participants in July's dialogue to join us to talk about what we discussed and those policy recommendations. And I can't wait to. But before we get there, we're going to hear a keynote from a very important person and someone who's a role model for me, and I think many of us here in Washington, as we all think about better ways to engage in the Mekong region, and that's Assistant Secretary Daniel Crittenbrink. And Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink really needs no introduction, particularly in a region. He's visited there several times already, and he also lived there in his last post as ambassador to Vietnam. His bio is on our event page, so I won't go too deep into that because we want to hear from him tonight. Assistant Secretary, over to you.
Brian, thank you so much for the overly kind introduction, and let me return the favor and say thanks to you and to your colleagues. I can assure you the tremendous work that all of you do is incredibly influential. We learn from you daily. Very grateful to you for that, and particularly grateful for your hosting this event, and am honored that you chose to include me. I really do want to just formally thank both the Stimson Center and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature for convening these dialogues, which, as you noted, aim to identify and empower Mekong citizens and governments to address pressing transboundary challenges. Again, thanks to you, Brian, to Courtney Weatherby, and all of our friends at the Stimson Center for convening this important event. Brian, I couldn't agree with you more. The United States is firmly committed to working with Mekong countries to realize a secure, open, and prosperous Mekong region. The Mekong-U.S. partnership utilizes a whole-of-government approach, combining the strengths and technical expertise of numerous U.S. agencies and departments. This collaboration enables us to provide technical assistance across the Mekong subregion and to identify solutions to emerging challenges. For friends on the line tonight, I want to emphasize that really the core of America's Indo-Pacific strategy is our commitment to building the collective capacity of partners and friends across the Indo-Pacific region. And nowhere is more important than the Mekong. To the United States, the Mekong represents both the river and the subregion, and we're committed, again, to building the collective capacity of partners and friends there, because we believe that the United States itself is more prosperous and more secure when our partners are successful. I think is hopefully the latest demonstration of our commitment to the Mekong subregion was some of the travel that both myself and my colleagues have carried out. I was really delighted. Just a couple of weeks ago, I traveled to both Laos and Vietnam. Maybe I could share just a couple of experiences. I returned to Hanoi, where Brian noted I had spent 3.5 glorious years as America's ambassador to Vietnam. This was my first trip back in my new job, and I was really moved by some of the events I participated in. We hosted a wonderful Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, YSEALI initiative alumni at Ambassador Napper's residence, and I think it highlighted our commitment to people-to-people ties across the Mekong, just as this event here does tonight. I had the chance to meet with some incredibly talented innovators. Did a virtual event with innovators focused on combating climate change, particularly in the Mekong Delta. And we discussed the need for how we can better support Mekong communities to adapt to the changing conditions they face, including in terms of agriculture. In Vientiane, I visited the U.S. Embassy's American Center. I saw the many ways we're promoting cultural understanding between our countries, and maybe the most interesting event of all, I met the CEO of the Mekong River Commission, Dr. Kitakun, at which time I was able to reaffirm the strong U.S. support and commitment to the mandate of the Mekong River Commission. And while there, I also visited the NGO Taiban, which some of you may be familiar with. I spoke with rural female entrepreneurs creating artisan textiles, and those discussions demonstrated to me the impressive work that's going on to improve the lives and livelihoods of communities in the Mekong subregion. And again, I want to underscore our continued commitment to that work. At the same time that I was traveling in Laos and Vietnam, my colleague, our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Dr. Jung Pak, who is in charge of multilateral affairs and our engagement with both ASEAN and the Mekong, was visiting Thailand and Cambodia. So simultaneously, we were flooding the zone, so to speak, and trying to demonstrate our commitment to our friends in the Mekong subregion. Turning to the subject of tonight's event, I really do want to underscore that the Track 1.5 Dialogue Series is, in our view, the flagship program of the Mekong-U.S. Partnership's Human Resource Development area of engagement. And as Brian noted, the most recent Track 1.5 report focused on soft skills, the challenges posed by automation and digitalization on underrepresented groups, and the importance of adapting modern technology to support data sharing and data protection, particularly in the healthcare sector. The report recommends ensuring that soft skill development remains a top priority in higher education, and we in the State Department fully agree that communication, problem solving, and listening skills will remain critical to the success of the entire subregion. The report also touches on the challenges faced by the introduction of new technologies. Today, more than ever, it's essential that we continue working across boundaries to institute policies and processes that enable workers to adapt to and embrace new technologies. For example, we all, of course, saw the rapid adaptation that was required of our healthcare workers due to the challenges posed by COVID-19. This report stressed the importance of training healthcare workers to ensure they're well equipped to use new technologies as they're introduced, enabling them to improve healthcare outcomes in their communities. Investing in the next generation is also critical to the Mekong subregion's success. And again, I truly applaud Brian and all of our friends at Stimson for their efforts to engage youth, including through the event, an event in Phnom Penh on the sidelines of the most recent dialogue, where I was told you held a teach-in discussion with 22 local students at the American University of Phnom Penh, and a hybrid event at the AmCham Exchange featuring speakers from the policy dialogue. I really hope these efforts to engage youth will continue, and I really commend you for holding them. So these policy dialogues, in our view, have provided concrete benefits to the participants, and I commend, again, Stimson's commitment to compiling and analyzing those outcomes so this information can be shared abroad across our interagency community and with all of our Mekong-U.S. partnership partners. So Brian, again, to you and to all of our friends online tonight, thanks for including me. Look forward to seeing how these policy recommendations work to strengthen the Mekong subregion to be more connected, inclusive, and innovative. And Brian, again, I'll just foot stomp what you said at the top. The work that all of you are doing is important. It has an impact. I've learned more about the Mekong, I think, from Brian and our friends at Stimson than anyone else. So really an honor to be here. Wish you a great conversation, and thanks again for including me.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink. Hey, before you go, I know you were just in Vietnam and Laos. You touched on some of your work plan there, but how about a highlight or a memory from revisiting Hanoi or your time in Laos?
Well, I'll tell you, I was moved by several things. I mean, just even the ride in from the airport and just sort of soaking up the atmosphere in Hanoi and crossing the Red River and seeing everyone out on the streets, walking around a bit on the streets. Just love the dynamism and energy in Southeast Asia. I always tell my colleagues that the 650 million people of the 10 countries of ASEAN, in my view, represent the most dynamic, energetic, youngest place on earth. And the United States recognizes that our collective 1 billion people together, we have a shared future. We're dependent on one another. We're really invested in that. I love Waisili events. The first Waisili event I went to in 2015, I thought I had stepped into a rock concert rather than a collection of young Southeast Asian leaders. And it's that energy and dynamism of young people across Southeast Asia. So incredibly impressive. Makes me quite optimistic about the future. And then I will say in Vietnam, I was inspired with the Mekong event that we held, a virtual event. And again, I was just blown away by some of the innovations. The thing that maybe I was most impressed by, one of Vietnam's most famous scholars working on the Mekong told me that they've come to realize they're going to stop fighting Mother Nature in the Mekong, and they're going to learn to adapt to Mother Nature. And that was quite moving to me. And I look forward to seeing how that goes. And maybe the last comment on Vietnam, really had some pretty extraordinary discussions with our friends at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Communist Party of Vietnam's External Relations Commission as well. And it reminded me of how candid and strategic our Vietnamese partners are as well. And, Laos was also extraordinary. Only my second time in Laos, my first time back since I had accompanied former President Obama when we launched our comprehensive partnership with Laos. And I was struck, to be honest with you, by just how far we've come bilaterally with Laos in those 6 years. Quite encouraging. I know our Lao friends on the economic front face a few challenges, but I think we're doing some great things together. And one last comment, Brian. Sorry, you've opened a whole flood of memories here.
This is great. This is great.
We also did a really neat event in Vientiane with what we call alumni of a whole range of U.S. exchange programs, people-to-people programs that we carry out across Laos. So there were alumni from Waisili, but there were Fulbright scholars, Humphrey Fellows, folks who had just gone to study on other exchange programs academically in the United States. And again, was really moved by bright, energetic young people and how they're working to improve Laos's future. And I was proud that we were playing a small part in investing in their success. And maybe one last one. All my years working on the region, I read a lot about the Mekong River Commission. I'd never visited. And so to be able to go there and talk with their experts in person was also moving to me. So those are a few highlights. I did eat some pretty good food while I was on the road there as well, which is always one of the best things to do in Southeast Asia. But really do love the region. And thanks again for all the work that you do, Brian.
Well, thank you, Assistant Secretary Quittenbrink. It's a pleasure to have you here with us and to kind of tee up our discussion as we move into the panel. And Assistant Secretary Quittenbrink, you're welcome to stay. I know you've had a busy day, busy week, so feel free to rest and get ready for tomorrow.
I really appreciate that, Brian. I may hang around and listen for a little while, but I wish you a great discussion, and thank you so much to everyone. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, moving into our panel, first, Assistant Secretary Quittenbrink unwittingly teed us up for and mentioned actually our next policy dialogue, which is about letting Mother Nature do the work. We're going to be hosting our next policy dialogue in Vietnam, in the Mekong Delta, on nature-based solutions as a theme in December. So stay tuned for more information on that. But and before we get to our panel, I do have to thank our hosts, our local hosts in Phnom Penh, who helped us execute a very seamless and successful policy dialogue. That's the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace, headed up by Ambassador Pu Sotirak and his wonderful team there. Part of his team, Brad Merg, is joining us tonight as Senior Advisor, and I'll get to his introduction very soon. But let me very briefly introduce our three panelists and discussants for tonight. First, who all joined our policy dialogue in person. It was great to see. It's great to see all of you again. First is Pontip Kanjananiot, the Special Advisor to CMEO REHED, the CMEO Regional Center for Higher Education and Development. Pontip is currently the Special Advisor for CMEO REHED, and she worked in various capacities in government agencies in Thailand, most of which are related to education. And she was also the Executive Director of Fulbright Thailand. And she's going to speak to us on the theme of education. After Pontip, we're going to hear from Lee Por Ho, who is the Senior Product Manager at Boost Capital, which is a fintech startup working towards financial inclusion and empowering women entrepreneurs. And prior to joining Boost Capital, she spearheaded the digital product development effort at Manulife and Cellcard, one of Cambodia's biggest telecommunication companies. And Por Ho will be talking to us about the digital space and labor innovation. And then finally, we're going to have a discussion about health and pandemic response from Bradley Merg, who is Distinguished Senior Research Fellow and Senior Advisor at CICP. In addition to his role at CICP, he also holds positions as the Associate Professor of Political Science at Paragon International University. And he's the Senior Academic Advisor at Future Forum and the lead editor of the Journal of Greater Mekong Studies, which just released its most recent issue last week. Well, let's jump right into our discussion panel. Over to you, Pontip, to kind of highlight our conversation about education and policy responses to educational needs in the region.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for this invite. I find it a very good opportunity after the Cambodian seminar and workshop. And what I like to highlight will be through Courtney's help. Could you share the slide, please? I only have 2 slides. I don't really want to go over 7 minutes, but let me try. Now, on the slides, you see that if we want to see Mekong and U.S. education in the middle, we will have to look at 4 key components. And then I would like to say that from the Cambodian workshop, we could do 2.5 in education. 2.5 means soft skills. Actually, the Assistant Secretary has stressed that we have talked a lot about soft skills. And the key element is that we need to have the integrated soft and hard skills. Basically, people talking about students, but we really have to think of all that have been involved in education, particularly the faculty, leaders, senior leaders in universities and their stakeholders. And we never forget students anyway, but we tend to overlook the importance of the quality of faculty and senior leaders in supporting and becoming the role models for soft skills. So integrated soft and hard skill, meaning that we need to have the role model and also look at the students as the center of the development. The second one that people talk a lot is about the engagement and collaboration. And I really feel so pleased to see that in Cambodia, it was really inclusive to have key stakeholders from everywhere, like Assistant Secretary mentioned. And we have to do more. We involve governments, university, community, that means the whole community, and also their communities where they're located, and public and private. We also touch on a lot about employers and how we have to really produce graduates that fit with the world of work. And so getting closer to the employers and their real needs will be the best. Now coming back, I glanced through the other 2 thematic areas as well. And we have been talking about platforms and resources. Resources meaning stats and also some of the information that we need to share, including infrastructure, both virtual and physical. One of the things that we don't really see is that it's the synthesis of all the common areas that we touch on that would be very useful. And that goes beyond the quantitative stats and the key lessons learned, the key good practices that should be included in these kind of resources. So across the themes, and that will be very useful for people to really look at it. And the one that we touch a little bit less is on the process and assessment. When we talk about assessment, that means during the course of the implementation, we need to have the macro view of the monitoring and evaluation. And this means the V and H, that means vertical and also horizontal. And after all, it will conclude in the reflections and go into the synthesis. So we all see one same picture. And what I like to see is the next click, please. Courtney, the next click, please. Yeah. We want to focus on human capacity. So that means cross generations have to be in. People from cross sectors and cross region will have to be in as participants or trainers. And then the dual roles will be fine for any kind of situation as appropriate. And the best is for us to see the cross-cutting issues between the U.S. and the Mekong sub-region. What I like to see is the role of the U.S. One more click, please. This is about people to people. So it's about the relationship building that we already have in our region. And more is to focus on inclusivity, which has been seen now. And the US will be the great model to be the key partner and then show the US as a key learner for people in the Mekong sub-region to follow as well. So for US to be the key partner and key learner, the next click, please. I would encourage us all to really look at the shared future, just like what Assistant Secretary said. And I would want to put in what more Dr. Rom Yen has said about sustainable learning and living. And I like it to put together into some kind of the suggested shared future of quality global citizens for sustainable learning and living together between Mekong sub-region and the US. And that means we have to have one Mekong and US team. What I mean is this: Mekong themselves need to know their own shared future, need to know their own specific context as well, and also extended to include US as partner and learner. We need to have one big Mekong and Mekong-U.S. picture so everyone has the same focus. I would love for us to think of maybe one priority focus. Since we talk a lot about hard and soft skill, somehow some kind of training that has already been in the plan and then put in some key engagement and collaboration issues that we have discussed in some kind of the sandbox. Go into the full ecosystem. That means you include monitoring and evaluation and also look at it horizontally and vertically. Come up with a good synthesis that will be very helpful, and that will be the true impact to the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Pontip, for that inspirational speech. Pontip, it's having you here again. It's just like having you at that meeting. You're such a driver of productive conversation and keep the energy up. You know, it's not easy being engaged in a 2-day work conference, right? And keeping focused the whole time. And Pontip really played an important role in helping us all maintain focus and having a sustained and productive discussion throughout those 2 days. So thanks again. Now over to you, Pohor, to talk about digital change in the labor sector in the Mekong region and in Cambodia.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I feel a bit underprepared because unlike pre-Pontip, I didn't prepare any slides. But yeah, so I'm just here to share.
That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, so I'm just here to share our reflections and what I learned throughout the 2-day dialogue discussion. First of all, I would like to thank the Simpson Center for organizing the event and really bring about a lot of diverse perspective into the table so we can have a very productive and inclusive discussion as well. So on labor track, we touch a lot about the Industrial Revolution 4.0 and digital economy, which of course been accelerated by the pandemic. Coming from tech background, I was really rooting for digitalization, especially in labor force. But what I learned throughout the whole discussion is that when we talk about the digital economy or digital transformation, especially from labor perspective, it's very tempting for us to say upskilling, right? Upskilling, providing digital training to our laborers. But actually, we first should look at what digitalization means for each of the different sectors, because it could look very differently. And then the upskilling should also tailor toward the changes or impact that Industrial Revolution 4.0 bring to these different sectors as well. For example, the Industrial Revolution 4.0 for agriculture could mean embracing the IoT, Internet of Things, or for the labor or the workers to understand how to use or leverage big data instead of doing pure labor or operating heavy machinery. But in garment factor or manufacturing, the digitalization could mean learn that now the labor need to learn to use new software in their tablet or in their computer, and less of doing the actual sewing work, like sewing work. So then upskilling means, looking at the right type of training based on the existing skill set that the labor have, and also how can we leverage their existing skill set so then they could, be prepared for this digital transformation. And ultimately, it's also about change management and really understanding the impact of the digital economy or Industrial Revolution 4.0 mean for all the stakeholders. And when we look at all the stakeholder involved, right, we also should look at it from a gender lens as well, meaning we all understand that women tend to be at a disadvantage when it comes to all this industrial revolution. We know that historically as well. And that's not even surprising because historically, we understand that women continue to disproportionately experience poverty, discrimination, social, economic, and political exclusion, as well as inequality access to education, which really limit their participation in the digital economy. So one of the policy recommendations we come up with as a group is for private sector actors, such as tech company and also government entity, to then look into subsidizing access to technology and digital devices, as well as subsidizing access to certain infrastructure such as electricity and internet for women and also other underrepresented group as well, so that now they become more familiar with technology. They can learn how to use it and don't feel like technology, are just for male, and from very young age, they now get themselves more familiar with technology. In addition to that, legislators and also government entity can look into provide tax break or other financial consideration or incentive, so that all these private sector actors are motivated to subsidizing access to technology and training for women. We also understand that it can be very hard to design a gender inclusive policy in the first place if we don't have the enough gender disaggregated data. And that's been, again, an issue that been echoing not just in this policy dialogue discussion, but in other discussion as well. So one of the another policy recommendation we have is for different entity to collaboratively share the data where available, and for donors and also government to look into enforcing how to standardize the data, so that all the data gathering and also researches come from a gender lens as well. Lastly, when we talk about labor and economy in the Mekong region, we also, we definitely need to talk about the migrants worker. And we understand that the existing process for immigration, especially for migrants laborers, are outdated by us. It's very time consuming, and there's a lot of unclear regulatory requirements, which push a lot of these migrant workers toward the irregular migration channels, through agency and whatnot, which could easily lead to human trafficking and abuses. So other policy recommendations we talk about as well is first, to build awareness around the village and commune level, especially because these are where majority of the migrant worker tend to come from. So first we need to look into educate them, for them to be aware that, when they migrate to other country, passport is important and whatnot. At the same time, government should look into reduce the cost of labor migration, especially through the official channel. So that could be done by simplifying, streamlining, and potentially digitalizing the formal process as well. So that was my takeaway throughout the whole discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Por. You covered a lot of ground, and we have to remember that your description is kind of part of the synthesis of trying to apply a somewhat common approach to common needs within the countries of the Mekong. And the countries of the Mekong wouldn't necessarily apply the same approaches, but perhaps similar cures, if you will, to these common ailments. Before we go to Brad, Por, could you maybe highlight an example or a case of from Cambodia that is reflective of how perhaps women are dealing with some of the challenges that you mentioned, or migrant workers in the labor and digital space?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Brian. So in case of like digitalization, we're seeing a lot of initiative from the government level as well to prepare the labor force for the digital economy. I'm very optimistic because right now the government is focused on the digital economy. And in addition, so that would mean that, for example, access to finance is much easier now. There's also a lot of initiative from the non-government organizations, for example, USAID and whatnot, that's specifically looking at empowering women entrepreneur access to finance. So that's part of the project where I work on, as well as part of my full-time job, where we do a chatbot as a loan application for these women entrepreneurs. So instead of like visiting the branch to apply for loan, which could easily take days or weeks, and the bank tend to ask for, the formal documentation of how you record your invoice and whatnot. What we do is we're able to digitalize the whole process so that the women entrepreneur, without having to leave their shops and whatnot, can easily apply for a loan. And they don't even need to have proper documentation on how they manage their money as well.
Great.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I might come back to others to ask for, specific cases or stories, if you will, that highlight the issues that you discussed. Well, thank you, Por. We're going to move to Dr. Brad Merck now, based in Phnom Penh, again, working for CICP. And Brad's going to talk to us about the health and pandemic response conversation that we had at the policy dialogue. Now, I have to admit, Brad's not a doctor or a health expert, but he is someone who lived through the pandemic, an expat who lived through the pandemic in Cambodia. And as a political scientist, I'm sure his mind was going, while being locked in at home, briefly in Cambodia, given Cambodia's success, on looking at how the region was responding both to pandemic response and then vaccine rollout, which was took up a lot of our discussion at the policy dialogue. So Brad, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Brian. It's great to see everyone again. On behalf of Ambassador Pusotrak, the Executive Director of CICP, it's been wonderful to partner with Stimson on the Mekong-U.S. Partnership Dialogue. And the event that we had in July really was a great marker of coming out of COVID. I recall so many of our colleagues being this is the first time we're actually together and able to discuss these issues over 2 days. And as Brian noted, really a wonderfully thorough, active, free-flowing conversation. So as a political scientist discussing health questions, so not MD, just the relatively lowly PhD, I think about this much more from the framework of political science and political economy. And the first point I'd like to note is really to echo what the Assistant Secretary, as well as what Pontip has noted, is really the question of a people-to-people dialogue, just in the context of the partnership itself, of really how the event that took place here, looking at medical questions as well as all the other issues we explored, was quite unique in light of the comparative regional cooperation mechanisms of really bringing together civil society and folks on the ground together with state actors. And here we had the great opportunity to hear from officials from the health and medical side, as well as from the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, as well as the World Health Organization. So a great chance to really bring together and yield some positive outcomes in terms of next steps and future pathways for health in the region. At the same time, as any event like COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've all experienced over the last couple of years demonstrates, is these are exogenous shocks. These are shocks that significantly alter the development of institutions, alter policy, et cetera. So when we think about the future of health, and over the course of our 2 days, looking at such a wide variety of topics, but as we look at how it moves forward, there's a really good chance that we all know there's quite a bit that needs to be reformed. There's quite a bit that needs to change. Spotlights have been shown on a very large number of areas. But today, I want to focus on two of the main outcomes that are discussed in the report on health and where things are going. And I think the most, really glad to see it in the report as a key takeaway is, yes, the outcome of COVID-19 and moving ahead has very much been the question of vaccines. And while we see serious other structural deficiencies and weaknesses across healthcare systems in the greater Mekong subregion, the question of vaccines shouldn't be left to one side as we all rush towards looking at various other topics, as important as they are. Rather, what we did see in Southeast Asia during COVID-19 was a very significant challenge of access to vaccines and lack of equity, lack of equality in terms of access to vaccines. Laos was particularly well noted here, but also in Cambodia, we did see the need for significant foreign supply, as well as fundraising directly from the private sector and Cambodian individuals in order to be able to procure initially Sinovac, et cetera, until we saw the gradual rollout of the COVAX initiative. And this question of inequitable access really also comes out of the gap that we continue to see in the development of healthcare systems as well as fiscal systems in the greater Mekong subregion compared to many of our other ASEAN partners. And that development gap, unfortunately, does continue to widen. At the same time, as we look forward to next steps in vaccination, the question of coordination, a long-standing challenge across ASEAN and globally on broader development questions, really has been brought right to the center. And the real importance of an ASEAN coordination unit working with national COVID task forces and in future with ministries on a regular basis in order to facilitate vaccine trade, in order to facilitate shared production, and that these relationships that have been built over the course of COVID-19 on an ad hoc basis, how these can be institutionalized and deepened and move forward in a way that the region as a whole and the greater Mekong subregion in particular is more well prepared in terms of having those networks, those relationships and clarity to ensure that we respond better than we did during COVID-19, although that's not to undermine or to underplay the relative success that we saw in the greater Mekong subregion. Here in Cambodia, our lockdown period was only about 3 or 4 weeks. We had some months of challenges, but we got off relatively lightly in terms of our caseload, in terms of our death rate, and in terms of the disruption that was caused compared to many other countries in the subregion as well as globally. Finally, on the vaccine point is just to highlight the question of the role of private sector actors. And now that we have this really front and center, the importance of public-private partnership and working with pharmaceutical companies, but also with logistics firms. And recognizing the severe logistics challenges that do come out of vaccine distribution. I think one of the greatest surprises that came out of the COVID-19 experience here was the fact that vaccination distribution went relatively well in terms of distributing to the population. However, getting it into the country, et cetera, became something of a challenge over time. Moving from the more specific question of vaccines to a more general takeaway is looking at the specific question of not just coordination, but the question of the need for capacity building in future in the healthcare sector. And that we do see that this is, despite especially here in Cambodia, decades of capacity building efforts. There are folks who obviously have excellent skills or very strong skills in their particular field in medicine, but might not have those skills necessary administrative-wise or technology-wise in order to utilize the new health systems that we see as being fundamentally vital, not just in a future pandemic, but for the long-term health and well-being of the region. As to next steps for the donor community, this is an area, a key priority area for technical assistance for the training of healthcare workers, and specifically the investment in new electronic systems. We have seen some significant jumps ahead in that area, but the more that can continue apace, the better prepared we'll be and the better outcomes we'll see. At the same time, we also saw, as vaccination moved ahead, the question of sharing of data. And this was one of the outcomes of the dialogue that was quite overwhelming, of the needing to share data sets and to establish shared standards to promote data sharing across the region and ensuring interoperability between hospitals and clinics. And again, better integration between the public and private sector and that information flow between the two that is so vitally essential. And finally, the need that is always a challenge, but we saw particularly during COVID, of really highlighting that many of our healthcare facilities do not just simply lack the full complement in terms of medical professionals, but also administrative and ancillary staff that are so vital for coordination, are vital for organization, et cetera. And that is a further gap that we explored. So we had a wonderful conversation. We're very excited about the conclusions, and hopefully everyone will have a chance to go through in detail and read the report. It's great to see have a little bit of a panel mini reunion here today. So thank you very much, and let me turn the floor back over to Brian, please.
Thanks, Brad. I'm going to come right back to you with a question and then circle back to Pontip with a question. Just that way I get to ask one question to everyone. Poho, you've already had yours, so you can rest assured. Brad, with development partners, there's a lot of discussion that development partners need to better coordinate efforts to the region. And apologies if this is the opposite of a softball, but you from your perch there in Phnom Penh, you've watched the various development partners act on pandemic. We had one of the key actors at the policy dialogue. We had the director of the CDC Southeast Asia Center there join us and really guide our discussion. That was a great benefit. The U.S. has its strengths, Japan has its strengths, Australia, et cetera. Are there opportunities? Let's say this happens again. We're not necessarily out of the pandemic yet. Are there ways that development partners can specialize or better coordinate, given their certain strengths, to achieve an even deeper impact for foreign assistance in the region?
It's a great point, and I think absolutely. We've looked at over the last 4 or 5 years across all of the greater Mekong subregion with the 13 different regional partners, plus bilateral partners as well, who are committed to the future of the river itself, as well as the region as a whole. We're not going to find a single coordination mechanism. It's just it was a pipe dream for a long time, and a more effective approach, which has been raised in a few forums now, is really having different governments, different entities that do have strength in particular areas. Really take on leadership in those, as opposed to everyone reduplicating the same or very similar efforts across multiple areas. So for donors, it's a really, and for partner institutions, it's a really important time to really take a look and say, well, what do we do well? What is the area where we are able to lead and we are able to provide an enormous amount of value that perhaps other partners, that's simply not their area. Recognizing strengths and then that can, and I do hope and actually think that this is a critical juncture, could move us away from that fragmentation and result in higher efficacy and more positive outcomes in terms of funding support and overall coordination and collaboration.
Thanks for that, Brad. And I commend you for your efforts on kind of guiding this conversation about coordination and specialization throughout a variety of policy issue areas. Now over to Pontip. Your question is about women and girls in education, and Poho mentioned kind of the gender challenge in the fourth industrial revolution. How are needs for women and girls being met in new ways in the education space in Thailand and the Mekong region itself?
I think one of the main issues that have been around in Thailand for decades is that Thai people, quite a number of people, don't really think that this is a problem. So when we think that this is not an issue, so we don't really go to see it. But more and more regional organizations have pointed it out, and also right now with the gender issue and also LGBTQ, I think that have highlighted the need for women and girls to really look into themselves. And we'll see in Thailand in particular, we see a lot more in science field. So that is good. And science, that means science and technology, not just science as researchers in laboratories, but go to engineering, to go to coding. So we don't really think that it's that urgent in Thailand, particularly in big cities. But we need to provide more awareness to people in Thailand. But for Mekong region in particular, I think this issue has to be highlighted in many of the forums that we carry on. So this will help us, the Thai people, to learn as well that this is something that we lack. We don't really understand from gender lens. And we have been working together with UNESCO on this issue, and it helps so much along with the LGBTQ. I think that has made this issue more prominent to the Thai eyes and definitely to the Mekong sub-region, and see one of the less awareness that Thai people have. So they could really understand that by understanding that this is an issue, we'll take it up.
We're going to see if our audience has questions for all of you, or any broad questions about the Mekong-U.S. partnership. Happy to field those that we can. And while we wait for our audience to populate the Q&A box, please put your questions in the Q&A box with questions. One, I'd like for Courtney Weatherby, our Deputy Director, to drop the link to the report we're launching in the chat if it's not already there. And that way you can all access it. And it's also up on the Stimson website for you to download. So there that is. And while we wait for questions, one other question, this is to any of our panelists, it has to do with data sharing. It's a simple question within the area that the theme that you addressed. What are the challenges to data sharing within that sector? Why isn't data shared? And if you could highlight a solution to improve the quality or the access to data within your respective theme. Anyone can take it. We don't need an answer from all of you. If anyone would like to answer, please do.
I think I'll do.
Please, thank you.
From working on quality assurance, and we have been suffering and still suffering. The thing is, we collect what we don't need, and the ministry keeps asking for more of something that they don't really use, or they don't really provide feedback of what and how they use it. So I think we really have to sit together between the ministries and universities, coming up with the data sets that everyone needs, and then some particular data sets that each university in each particular field needs. Like in medical schools, they have gathered together to come up with a common data set to be used by themselves as well. So every level should be trying to come up with the right, appropriate data sets to be shared. And the universities can group together and come up with specific indicators and then data that they can make best use in their areas of specialization. We see very good practices from the medical world in Thailand. And we just hope that the ministry and universities will really sit down together and identify just a few, because we have been asking, that means I used to work for ministry and I identify myself as the ministry people, and we still ask for something that may not be of use. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the health sector, I think that we can some very similar challenges as well to those that sort of Pontit mentioned in terms of ensuring that material that is reported is actually what's needed. But also for health, it's really a question of setting shared standards across the region for the sort of data that's going to be reported. And this came out very strongly in the discussions of, okay, well, Cambodia's collecting this, Thailand's collecting this, Vietnam's collecting that, and we have differing questions, so doing cross-national comparison and broader sub-regional analysis becomes something of a challenge. So really beginning with taking a step back and looking at, okay, maybe we can move ahead towards some degree of standardization. I think education actually provides a very good parallel in the ASEAN context when we look at the ASEAN University Network and its accreditation process, trying to establish a commonality of standards or baseline standards across ASEAN higher education. And in terms of health data, et cetera, continuing that both has positive outcomes for coordination, as well as the further integration of health as the health sector in particular, but also ASEAN and the greater Mekong sub-region overall. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. Porhor, any thoughts on data sharing challenges and solutions?
I just think there could be like a better enforcement, especially from like private donors or from government entity as well. But I think mainly from private donors, especially when there's any donation for funding for any initiative, we can further enforce the structure of the data and also the way we collect data.
Okay, great. We do have one question in the Q&A box. I'm going to kind of recalibrate it. It comes from our founding director of our program, Dr. Richard Cronin, who's tuning in from Washington, D.C., I believe. And he's asked about framing rivers in the region from Thailand's perspective. So Pontit, this is a question for you. It has to do with kind of biases that exist in Thailand. So it's a tough question, but you know, particularly in Bangkok, the people of Bangkok see that the Chao Phraya River is kind of the royal river of Thailand. It's the main river of Thailand, where the Mekong is that other river out there where, you know, the minorities live. That's quoting Rich's question. This regional discourse about the Mekong sub-region that's been happening for a long time now, is it helping change the perception from Bangkok, if you will, or from Thailand proper, of the region itself, you know, as well as how Thailand views its own portion of the Mekong region and Mekong Basin?
Thank you for the question. I think we, the Bangkokians, were ignorant, and we thought Chao Phraya was the only river that we saw every day, in and out. And right. After we have more of the education exchanges, and we have been very active in GMS region, particularly with these GMS specific countries, and more students going with the exchanges. Right. And also faculties. I think that helps so much, because we now know that we have to really accommodate Mekong. And I haven't really heard people talk about Chao Phraya and Mekong much anymore. And we see from TV that when Mekong suffers, we suffer a lot. And particularly those countries along the Mekong River, and we travel a lot. Traveling has opening our eyes, right. And also exchanges have really changed our perceptions. I think right now, especially one key issue is that when we were trying to become ASEAN, we have promoted both ASEAN countries, that means the original 6-7 countries, and then GMS. And then that is the reason why we focus both, and our understanding has increased.
Great. Well, thank you for that answer. And Rich, I hope that kind of satisfied your curiosity that things are changing in the Mekong region. we have reached the end of our hour. And this has been a great discussion. It's kind of wide, right? We're looking at 3 different themes rather than one theme, and thinking about how human resource capacity can be built within each of those themes by applying some common approaches and some specific approaches. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining. I hope the next time the White House has a fact sheet for its programming to ASEAN, or the State Department talks about its new programming to the Mekong, that you see your additions in there. And I think you should, again, rest assured that this process is one that, being a non-governmentally driven process, bringing government and non-government actors together can help define outcomes and a better engagement for the United States and better outcomes for the Mekong region. So again, on behalf of our partner IUCN and our local host of this past dialogue, CICP, and I also have to thank APCSS out there in Hawaii for sending their faculty to help facilitate our conference in July as well. I want to thank all of you for joining. Please check out our report. The link is in the chat line and on the Stimson website as well, and take a deeper dive into that discussion that we had back in July. Our next policy dialogue will be held in mid-December in Can Tho, Vietnam, and we'll be taking a deep dive into nature-based solutions, a very hot topic in policy discourse, the climate policy discourse, particularly these days and months, and something to watch in next week's COP in Egypt, COP27, where nature-based solutions will be a major topic of discussion. Thanks again for joining, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.